Is there an Uber Lyft version in the world of private jets? Yes, there is. And what does that have to do with sustainability? Well, that's my next guest. CEO Andrew Collins of Sentient Jet is on a mission to transform private flying into a new business model. They want to make it as accessible as possible while being carbon and other emissions neutral at zero cost to their clients. How is their team doing this? How are they offsetting their emissions? And how do they convince their board and stakeholders to go along with it? Andrew gives us the insider story, a story of transformation and adaptability. Look, I really enjoyed this conversation, so I hope you guys do as well. This is Through the Noise podcast. I'm your host, Ernesto Glucksman. Let's get started. All right, Andrew, thank you for joining me on the show.
Great to be here.
It's not, I've had conversations with some rather large businesses, capital intensive business, but it's not every day that I get to talk to a CEO of a private jet company and the world that you're in. So, I don't fly private jets. So maybe can you give me a sense of what this sort of, your services cater to a clientele that probably has a little bit deeper pockets than the average person. So give us just a sense of what it's like for those customers and what's the service you're hitting them with, you're sort of narrowing in on.
Okay, so Sentient Jet has been an innovator in private aviation for nearly 25 years. We invented something called the private jet card. So you're not actually buying in a jet or a fraction of a jet like some of the other business models out there. You're just buying time, 25 hours at a time. And it caters to people that are executives in business, entrepreneurs, or, folks of the ultra high net worth set. And, really what it is we're providing the easiest way for somebody to simply just reach out, book a jet within 48 hours, and then simply fly as they need to. And it's just debited down on their account. They don't have to think about, is there a crew? What's happening here? How do I do this? How do I do that? It's all taken care of for you. We have, a great history. We have a client historian. We have 7,000 cardholders that use this service, and it's robust. We fly 30,000 plus flight legs a year, and we continue to grow.
So it's sort of the clientele where maybe you need, for whatever reason, you might need an emergency private jet because whatever your usual mode of transportation might not be available in the moment, right? It's kind of like an Uber type of service versus outright buying your own private jet and dealing with how to deal with that, right?
Yeah, it's the easiest way to look at it is this. There's, three tracks that you can get a private jet. You can either own a private jet, you can buy a portion of a private jet, or you can rent a jet, right? Okay. And so in the world of renting or just purchasing time, you can choose one of two paths. You can choose something like a formalized product like ours, which has a lot of guarantees and a service level commitment and all sorts of stuff. Or you can choose what they call on demand, which is otherwise known as charter. And the on demand piece is really, you're looking for a jet, you're calling or you're emailing or filling out web forms, or you're going to somebody that you're used to using, but it's not as consistent and it's not as guaranteed. What we offer is, you're guaranteed an aircraft, you're guaranteed a set price. And so to your point, it's great in a pinch, right? It's great when you need that access, and it has an Uber-like quality to it, right down to the fact that we have a mobile booking app.
So pardon, say that again, the last piece.
It does have an Uber-like quality to it, because it is, something that we right down to a mobile booking app. We have done a ton of bookings through our mobile app and have folks that prefer it. So it is very much a service that allows you, with as little friction as possible, to access a private jet and be on your way.
Okay. So, we talked about this off mic before we were prepping for the episode. We want to cover the sustainability, but before I go there, just a couple of things that kind of caught my eye when I was just looking into you guys. you under your stewardship as a CEO here, you did a digital transformation process with the company. So that's always interesting because that, you're effectively coming into an existing business model, existing business. It's running in a certain direction.
Right.
And then to sort of couple a digital transformation, it's like you're putting in a new engine while the thing's actually
Right.
literally flying, right?
Yeah. Or in the air. Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So what was that like? Can you characterize a little bit of that world, that process, how that went through?
That's been a fantastic process, and the reason being is you have to have willing participants to do that, and
Okay.
and you read all the time about people that try to do digital transformation, and there's sort of this legacy of systems, places, people that just for whatever reason they're not seamlessly coming together. We have a fairly nimble organization. We're about 150 people. But we're part of a bigger organization called One Sky, which has some sister companies that do other things in private aviation. And for us, it was really about we were getting to the point with 7,000 cardholders and putting as many as 150 flights a day up that we noticed that there are varying types of segments that fly with us and consumers. And I myself, when I travel, I'm not a high touch person. I am fairly anonymous. I go through, I love digital, right? I love going through, an entire day of travel where, it's fairly seamless and I can get from point A to point B kind of on my own wits. Other people really prefer that high touch and we'll never lose that. But what we discovered was we could actually encapsulate the digital booking of a jet. We could encapsulate a lot of things. We could take our legacy systems, bring them into more of a retail touch point. And we could not only do that, and we've probably seen, I don't know, about $120 million in just flight transactions year to date. And we'll probably see somewhere in the neighborhood of $250 million. And we're about a $550 million company in terms of top line revenue. So you're talking about a sizable jump in terms of the amount of people that are working with us digitally. And recently, and we're really at the early stage of this, we introduced almost an AI-like quality to what we do in that we have a way for somebody to use just text, not even a mobile app, to communicate with us automatically and book and quote and do things that they might do with a person. They can do it through text and they can do it instantly. And we're unleashing that to our client base because a portion of our client base, especially in the last 2 years with the pandemic, pretty tech savvy folk, and they want that avenue. They always have a live person 24/7. They always have an email address. They always have anything they want to use basically. But what we've done is we've realized we can create service efficiencies. We can meet, which is probably a new travel segment of consumer, which is one that, kind of likes to do it friction free and almost in an automated way. We're just trying to address what the consumer wants, and we're trying to provide the service as quickly and seamlessly as possible. That's our job. Right. So the digital transformation has to happen because that's where the world is headed. And last thing I would say there is, especially in the pandemic, McKinsey put out this great study that said, 10 years of technology adoption happened in the first 10 weeks of the pandemic because everybody had to use Instacart. Everybody had to use different ways to think about it. So we've built upon that kind of theme and we've been doing it for a number of years. And I actually have a digital background, but I guess I'd go back to the beginning, which is you have to have a willing set of participants in your team and in your consumers to kind of evolve it, or it's a hard job.
Well, and then that's interesting. So aside from the meeting of the potential future customer base that might have wanted to just communicate, I mean, your customer, so why not accept the request from them through text if that's the mode they want to communicate with, right?
Absolutely.
And then, or the one that wants to still make the phone calls. But was that part of that must have been part of the digital transformation, but how far back did you overhaul your systems to then be able to automate some of that or have some, did you just try ad hoc software until you found the right set, or did you have a vision where you wanted to be and you wrote some of this stuff in-house, coded it or whatever?
Yeah, so it's a great question because I think a lot of folks would just potentially go off in one-off directions. I mean, you have to build a set of, a code store essentially that you can reuse, and you have to build kind of almost an API ecosystem, right? You have to build an ability to bring things together and, have the hooks and the pipes and scale. We have a legacy system that we're not off of yet, but we've built enough around it, and eventually we're going to do away with that system, right? And it had to be a custom system based on what we do. We are moving more towards, a cloud-based API infrastructure with, a lot of data that's been cleansed, sits in the cloud, that can actually come out in various directions. And that's only because we thought about scale. And that's the other thing, when you're doing digital transformation, it's not just launching an app and saying we've transformed digitally, right? That's not it. You actually have to say, how are you going to scale and what's your roadmap to scale? So our chief technology officer is very bright and is also hooked into our parent company. So we're looking at two playing fields. We're looking at the Sentient Jet playing field. Then we're looking at the OneSky playing field overall from a master systems perspective, and obviously from buying scale and things like that. But you have to look at that. If you don't, I don't really think you're doing a transformation. I think you're just doing an instance.
You're just adding components.
Yeah, you're just bringing in a component, and it's just an instance. And so we're trying to link it together. And then the last thing I would tell you is a part of a digital transformation that's critical and key is you have to decipher as much as you can ahead of time. And I love companies like Domo, for instance, where they force you. It's a glanceable information system, right? It's there's a bunch of them, right? And Tableau is another one, right? And so on and so forth. But
dashboarding type tool.
Dashboarding, exactly. So perfect. So getting to a dashboard, though, you have to be very disciplined in looking at it, because you've got to say, okay, what data matters and what data, what's the painkiller data? What's the vitamin data? Like, what do I want to have? And that exercise is really important as part of your transformation. So when we went and architected this text-to-book technology, we looked at it and said, okay, in addition to obviously enabling our customers on the back end of this, what kind of data are we going to get out of it? What are we going to learn from it? Obviously, it helps us improve that booking channel and that experience, but it might tell us something further about our client base and that particular facet of clients that use that technology or that channel. And so we've done that with mobile. We've done that with a lot of systems. And so you can have as much data as you want, but you got to say, okay, what's the right data to get and how's it going to continue to scale us as well? That's also important. And knowing how you're going to capture that, the integrity of it, and then how you're going to ultimately use it.
This is Andrew, this is so insightful. I have a question then on the, how do you keep your team focused on the right data? Because there's always this issue. My background's in technology. There's always this issue of just because you can measure it doesn't mean that data point's worth measuring / tracking, right?
Sure.
And so how do you go from, we can collect all this stuff, we can make all these dashboards about all this stuff, but how much of it is actually actionable, from what is it that we need and what would it take to get that stuff tracked, right? Because somebody at some point somewhere, whether it's the customer offering the data point or an employee or somebody, has to start putting that data into the system, right? Like getting it collected and then having it reflect back to your dashboards, right? There's a gap there. How do you make sure you keep that team thinking optimally about what it is that we really, really need here?
Great question. There's two ways I think I look at it, just based on my experience in doing this, and others can have different experiences. I would say the first is that you have to ideally have the right people in the room, right? One of the biggest ways I see data swings and misses is when other people make the assumptions for other groups or the people that are not, the authoritative hand on the proverbial till, right? So if I want, our head of flight operations in the room, because our head of flight operations is going to tell me, what is important, right? Outside of maybe what I look at. you then can make the decisions, right? And collectively you can look at it, but ultimately you're trying to pre-wire two types of data and sort them out: primary data and diagnostic data. I would capture diagnostic data as like 90% of the data that you can get, right? One story I would remember is I was asked very early on in my career with Sentient to take over a department, and the person that was leaving handed me all the metrics that they tracked, and it was like 35 data points, different KPIs. And I looked at it, and by the time I was done, I actually only looked at 4, right? Because the rest of it was just under the hood stuff. And yeah, you could refer to it when you were trying to run down a challenge or look for a trend that was a little deeper. But really, to run the group, you only needed a handful of the true KPIs to run the group. We've tried to stick to that philosophy. I can tell you, I've got a lot of analytical people in this business, and we've got, hundreds or thousands of data points, but we run off of maybe 15. And in order to do that, you really have to have the people in the room who have ownership of that KPI and know that KPI, right? And can explain in a group setting when they look at, what's the revenue per leg of a flight, or, what's the conversion rate of a customer sale, or, what are we looking at relative to our scheduling efficiency? They can explain all the deep dive stuff, right, to the group, and they own that. And if they need to reference something else, they can bring it into the room. But for what I care about is, show me my 9 domo cards, right? Show me what is telling me that the business is operating on a green light or even a yellow light at times level, and nothing red. And if I've got something red, I know exactly how to track it down. I don't know if that explains it, exactly the way you asked me the question, but parsing out the importance and then optimizing, it's not just you. Right? I have a lot of bias in my data, right? I love looking at certain things, but it doesn't mean everybody should be looking at it, right? And so you got to really parse it out, and you got to really have the right people helping you to do that.
Just reminding me as you're just discussing this, like I went a trip with a friend who does mergers, acquisitions, and he's very analytical. And anyway,
of course, yeah.
I asked on this before we were packing his car up, like, do we have everything we need? And his question back to me was, do we need everything we have? Sort of like that constant rubbing against that, right? But at the end of the day, your primary data points, this sort of the things you need to focus, these are the essential elements to know the health of the business. And the diagnostic is when you, as you mentioned, you go finding, or you might want when there's something that's not quite right. You want to understand now the why, or what's happening, why it's not quite where you were expected. But this type of digital transformation is quite an investment. So how did you go about preparing like the board of like this process that we're going to undertake? We're going to invest in this, meeting the customer, getting more analytical with the data that's coming through. And that's going to steer our business in a certain direction. But they want to know, well, what's the return rate on this investment? And what are expectations? But when you start at the very beginning, how do you have that mapped out and well enough for them to make that decision, yes, go, no, go kind of thing for everybody?
I think if I was to actually answer it in a revisionist way, it would sound really seamless and flawless and perfect, right? But I would tell you, I had the good fortune, and maybe this is the answer, of being able to start with simple stuff and various instances to get there to kind of proof of concept. But it's that data that came out of it, that when I walked into a board meeting and I could sit there and say, our flight margin is this, and this is why it is. And then someone would ask me a question and say, well, you probably don't know this, but, what does your average customer fly in a year? And I would say, well, it's 9 months and they burn it down and they do this, 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 and this. And I think people on the board started to recognize the empowerment and the ability to run the business. And at the same time, we were growing the business, right? And we were growing it in a way that had never been done before. So I think it was kind of this propitious alignment of, successfully growing the business and speaking to the things that were coming out of really initial tech kind of, instances that allowed us to then say, and come into a goal planning session and say, here, this is what we want to invest in this year, right? This year, we want to, make the transformation to mobility. Here's what we're going to get out of it. Once we've gotten that there, and in fact, prior to mobility, it was really about the dashboarding, right? Because there was so much data that was just, shooting around the universe, and we influenced our parent company. We did it.
Wow.
And, and I'll never forget the day. It was very early on. It's probably about 8 years ago. I had a giant touchscreen screen set up on a wall in a conference room, and our chairman and some other board members came in, and they were waiting for about 15 minutes before we were going into a big company meeting. So they're on site, they're visiting, and there's nothing in this room other than them on a phone or a laptop or this really cool TV that you can touch and you can suddenly look at and say, wow, how much volume did they have today? And you click it, and then it shoots out another set of data. And it immediately resonated, right? And then it immediately became a mandate to put it in across all the brands at our companies. So I think it's the influential piece. And I really do believe it's showing, even in an early instance, that ROI that you can get from technology and from digital, as opposed to trying to spin up, a venture capital like deck in a way and say, look, if we do this huge investment at the end, this could happen. It's more, here's what we're getting out of it right now. Imagine if we went this step further, what we could get out of it. And then we do. And then imagine that. And then it becomes, here's the roadmap, right? We didn't start with the roadmap to begin with, as much as I'd love to tell you that. Like, oh yeah, no, it was a 5-year vision and it was this and that. No, now we have a multi-year vision, and we invest in significant CapEx and drive forward. And we're patent pending on a couple of things. We're really into it, and we're really pushing it because we've seen the benefit, we've seen the growth, we've seen the service optimization, but we didn't start right with the big stuff. We kind of worked our way into it and showed what it could do.
It's almost like you went in there, try to sort some of the noise out to find what are the actual trend lines that we can count on, right? And then you make those small steps, you present it in a more clear manner that it's backed by the data. They don't have to go digging into, but it's there if they want to. And then you take bigger and bigger leaps as you build the trust, right? It just seems like this is the story that we keep hearing from the businesses that have truly gone through sort of this digital transformation process versus just coupling things as they go along.
Well, it feels a little more authentic, and it feels very real. Like it feels like you're actually doing it and you're on the journey when you're actually producing results from it and can speak to things you haven't been able to speak to before, or shine a light on something in a better way, or deliver a service that has just that incremental surprise to it or lift to it to the end consumer, that they look at it and go, wow, that's compelling. Or look, you mentioned Uber before, but that was the brilliance of Uber was the business model as well, and the alignment of using excess capacity. But one of the things that was really killer about it was the first time you used it. You hit a button and something showed up. You went, oh my God, this is incredible. And digital enabled that, but it was really that that experience that I think drove then obviously the adoption of the service, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of payoff, and you just have to be able to capture what you can up front as quickly as you can and learn from it, and then go from there.
Right. So let's shift into the sustainability, because I presume some of that is driving the sustainability. Some of that data collection, your customer base that you have, is driving the sustainability aspects of the business. So, I mean, it's jet business, right? And you're using gas. So far, that's the only way we can fly in jets.
Right.
And to a degree, you could look at the airlines. I think one of the biggest for the whole airline industry, not just private jets, but, it's 2% of emissions across, whatever. Why put efforts to sort of offset in this area, this sector that's still pretty small relative to other sectors, like other types of transportation, right? But so I want to know your insights and how you got to the point, but give us a sense of what's happening right now. So if I get into, Sentient, and I get my card, and what's the sustainability? What are the things I can count on from the business you guys have?
So, we have a message that we have in the marketplace that says a more thoughtful way to fly. And, it's funny, a lot of folks will tell you that mission statements and, various things that get, spray painted on a wall or what have you, or show up in an annual report, are kind of meaningless unless they're acted upon. I think we act upon that concept every day. This was one that we wanted to do something special, and we worked in conjunction with our larger corporate entity, OneSky, to do this. But what we do is we offset at a 300% level the carbon dioxide that is emitted. And so let me say why.
Okay.
I think that most people in the space that in any space that impacts the environment, will do something that is surface level. They'll offer, here's a link if you want to offset your flying, or pay a little extra and offset your flying, right? It seems like, hey, that's at least something, but it's really not the true investment that I think folks really need to start to make. We, as you point out, have a limited impact, but we also have an impact, and we really feel like we should be doing something about it. So to that end, when you buy 25 hours, you don't pay extra. We have built in an investment that we make in the multi-million-dollar investment annually, where we offset 300%. And it's not just, trying to get at, offsetting. It's about getting true emissions neutral, getting rid of, or offsetting the water vapor, the aerosols, the nitrous oxides. You're not really getting rid of them, but you're offsetting them. That's 2/3 of what gets produced out there. So I think we're going beyond. And then lastly, we've charted a path for our card owners that if they even want to go further, they can actually work with our partner that does this with us, For Air, and they can become a climate champion, and they can invest in a fund that can actually go even further. And we've had a chunk of our client base that have also opted to do this. But every single leg that gets flown from Sentient has 300% offsetting associated with it. Last thing I will tell you, what does this represent? This year, through June, it represented 291,000 metric tons of offsetting. That's an increase over last year. Last year, I think we were the largest private aviation to do this, aviation firm to do this. But in kind of layman's terms, and I like to bring it to that when I can, it represents, the offsetting that we paid for this year represents 345,000 acres, or nearly 5 million tree plantings, or the equivalent of, essentially the energy for an average US town for an entire year. So I think it has meaningful impact. I think the money then goes to meaningful endeavors to do the offsets. It's also registered and audited. And I think what we're trying to do is set maybe a unique or innovative example that not only is who we are, this thoughtful company and this thoughtful brand, but how can we also point the way in private aviation, or be one example of perhaps how to engage in this. It's not perfect, right? To your point, we are in this business and we do impact the environment and the climate, but we're trying to do what we can, and we're trying to grow from here, almost like what we talked about with the tech transformation or the digital transformation. This is something we researched, we're starting at, and now we're starting to grow it. And my hope is, much like the way that, digital has really taken root in our firm, I'm hoping this takes root in a way that we can grow it from here and do other unique things that can impact it.
So how has that, because this is relatively new initiative, right? 2021, as you guys have started this.
Yeah.
Aside from the actual offsets, which is, I think it's commendable. I think it should be an aspect that every company just in the business that you guys are in should just be like, this is what we're doing. And what we're hoping down the line is that there may be other competitors, but you can look and their sustainability efforts don't quite measure up, or non-existent. In which case, if you're already a high roller, what's it really mean to you? How much more, or and in your case, it doesn't sound like you guys are rolling that into the pricing for the actual customer base. So this is a true investment from the business into this type of methodology. what are you hoping it can achieve or it can bring to the growth of the business? Because I presume you'd have to explain that to somebody, to the other board members, your chairman,
Sure.
and so forth,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Great question. You actually have to think about it in multiple constituencies, right?
Okay.
So our clients are going to, it's going to resonate with a portion of our client base, right?
Okay.
And given who we are, the level of service we provide, and kind of the innovative ways we've tried to be thoughtful, I think it's just part of our brand. It weaves into the fabric the same way that we invest in technology or safety. It weaves right in, and I think it makes sense. And I think it sets an example. So that's a piece. I also think that from a client standpoint, this will become, I mean, if I think about it pragmatically, this is going to be, hopefully, knock on wood, become something that becomes a standard someday, where if you're flying, you've got to register what you're doing, right? You've got to have, I would imagine, and I'm trying to see around the corner like in technology, but my guess is that if you're a officer of a company, you may very well have to explain your travel footprint at some point in some audited way. So why not build a way to do that inherently right down to the systems? So what we're working on now is not just offsetting, but when someone receives an invoice for their flight or they look at their balance or anything like that, it's going to show what they've offset, right? And so I think there's that, and I think that's kind of the future, and that's the future of thinking through, how do you want your business to impact things, and how do you want to help blaze a trail to do that? But pragmatically, I think our customers at some point are going to be held to that. If that's 5 years from now, 10 years from now, who knows? But I believe that. I think our company believes that. So that's one constituency. Second constituency is our team members, our employees, right? They want to work at a company that looks to consistently make a difference. And I think we always have in various ways. This is yet just another example and version of it. It's not done solely for the purpose of just saying, hey, let's be great people, right? It's done on the idea that this is where we need to be sensible. Yes, we want to be good business citizens, but also you want to be proud of where you work. You want to be proud of what you do. You want to feel like what you're doing. I mean, as a diversion for a second, the funniest thing that I always encounter is when I tell people what I do, I'm in private aviation, immediately they're like, oh, do you fly LeBron James? Right? Or things like that. And if I was to pull, Ernesto, if I was to pull our schedule today, the amount of people that are going to a hospital to get some sort of, care that's really important that they can only receive, in a different geography, the amount of business things that get solved in a given day, the amount of capital that moves around by somebody that's going to impact our economy, right? The list goes on, right? Reuniting family members, going through the pandemic there's so much that happens that we do that I think our team resonate with. It's why we have a long tenure of people here. They actually know what we do. They see what we do, and they have relationships with these card owners. This is just yet another extension to it. And then lastly, that last constituency you mentioned, it's our board members, right? And what I just explained to you is pretty much how we talk about it at a board meeting or with our chairman. And our chairman is a very innovative individual and very evolved, and is very supportive of this. And so subsequently, it's not a hard conversation, to be honest with you. It's more of a, to your point, when you think about this, how are you going to implement it? What's it going to impact? How are you going to track it? And ultimately, will it lead to something else? Can you scale somewhere else? So I don't know what comes after this exercise, right? But I do know that in our industry, we're looking at things like SAF, which is sustainable aviation fuel. And, we use all sorts of operator partners to fly jets. And, someday it could be that we make a distinction on what type of fuel somebody uses and who we purchase from. But getting the baseline and the mindset ready for that and doing it in a way where it's not just, hey, here's a brochure on how to offset. Right? That feels a little bit limited, and it feels a little bit like maybe you're trying to appease somebody. I don't think that's our mission, and I don't think that's what we're trying to do.
I mean, I think that could even be a reputational risk if you do it at that, like if you do the sort of just brochure greenwashing is like the call. If you're
Sure,
not
greenwashing.
actually
Absolutely.
right, it could hurt the business. On the other hand, just waiting for potential. I mean, we could probably imagine the near future will be more and more regulation, maybe certain states coming down the pike, where if you want to even just have airplanes flying in that from airports in those locations, you're going to have some proof of what you're doing. So effectively, I wonder, I mean, is that part of the thinking through this? Like we we should need to build the infrastructure. There's some subset of customer base. It looks like it's growing, that they're interested in this information, that might be compelled to have to choose this business as opposed to somebody else who doesn't have the infrastructure. So let's just start working into this and understanding what we're doing here.
It's interesting that you say that. So this has hit, we're a global entity, right? As I said, we're part of this one sky. And one of the things I would tell you that's interesting is Europe clearly had a much bigger set of optics on this a lot earlier. And so, but one thing I did notice from it is, if I went from, like, let's say Heathrow into London city center, I noticed a lot of, like, what they call petrol or gas stations that would flaunt kind of what they were doing environmentally. And it felt very defensive and very marketing driven and pull in here because we are doing something, right? I think if people are along those lines in the way they think about this, then I don't know that you're going to have high efficacy with what you do. So, for example, I could walk in with financial results that were much healthier annually if we didn't do this, or if we pushed it onto the customer to do it, or if we thought about different ways to do it. But we know that based on how we think culturally, and also how we think about this in the future, we want to make this investment. We need to start, and we need to go forward. Will there be regulation? I can't really predict the future, but I'd have to think that that's going to happen, right? And I think for us, it's less about maybe, I'm gaining a customer because we do this, and a lot more about, this is likely going to be the natural way that business evolves. So you should pay attention to it now. And why wouldn't you pay attention to it? I mean, I think it's the smartest thing you could do outside of servicing your customer base in many respects. And we could talk for hours about why, but at the end of the day, I do feel like if you start with the idea that, hey, if we do it this way, we'll gain more customers, I think you'll fail, right? I think it's kind of like what you said up front with, if I just put offsets in front of you, it might look very much like I'm greenwashing, right? I think, like, genuinely what we've done here is we've gone beyond what, we probably had to do, I guess, in theory. But we did it because it's not just one step and then we're good. It's because we're exploring and we're trying to figure out, okay, how do we go from this point to the next point? And then where does it matter from there? So it is maybe a lot like that pattern of digital transformation. We're just trying to figure it out. And so this is almost like a sustainability transformation in a way, and just trying to figure it out and go through it. Last year was the first year we did it from Jan 1 onward, and we offset nearly, 600,000 or 540,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide. And that was, really amazing to kind of think about that number and think about what that means and think about what that impact is. But we're, in retrospect, I mean, we think of ourselves as kind of this large entity, but we're kind of a small entity in the world. And if everybody thought about it this way, the impact could be that much greater.
Do you have any plans on having this program with your partners? And I think there's like a third-party rating.
It's called 4Air. Yeah.
4Air. Okay.
Yeah. The number 4 and then air. I think they're at 4air.aero. I think that's their site.
Do you sort of, like, thinking if I was in your shoes, I would want to like figure out ways to sort of celebrate that with my employees, right? Like actually see or have presentations from the partners that are they're helping you offset the carbon, right? I mean, you're flying a jet. You got to burn it. You got to burn the fuel to get this thing in the air. That's just what's going to happen. But then where is the money going to take O2 out of the air? I was just talking to a guy on the show recently. They have a process for natural gas. Instead of just burning natural gas at a location where you might need it for like making steel or something, they have a process they can add at the factory or the manufacturing plant where it takes the CO2 out into actual dust. It's actual dust that you can actually put it then into something else like cement or whatever. And so that's their patent pending process. That's what they're going to market with. This is a thing that exists, right? And so is part of this paying for capital investments and things like that for other parts of the, like, what's the story there?
Yeah, absolutely.
You're pulling that into the business as part of the work you guys are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I would give 4Air its due. It's a very innovative company. They have thought about this a lot different than others. They've built, sort of the rating system and are using, independent third parties to do the auditing on the offsets and things like that. So they're screening out what happens with these investments. And for us, we were able to kind of pick and choose some things that we felt were important. So right in Massachusetts, for instance, we're helping to fund something called the Triforce Project, which is, I actually grew up in the western part of the state. It's in the western part of the state, just coincidentally. But it's 3 towns that came together, and it's really about, carbon sequestering. And every year they sequester about 122,000 metric tons of CO2. We also participate in a project that is around, the grid and coming up with alternative energy. We look at things like agricultural forestry. So celebrating with our team members is important, and we plan on, we'll have a meeting this fall, and we'll go through, our results as a company and the typical things that we do. But we have a new section that will show this for sure. And like I said, that's part of the constituency that should understand this. And by the way, this is a company where a good portion of these folks had to learn about this and had to understand it because they were going to be asked about it, right? Mm-hmm. So, on point, on the phone, in an email or what have you, they're going to get asked, some of the questions you might ask are just simple questions, right? Like, why'd you guys do this? Or, oh, I didn't realize that. Tell me more about it, right? So kind of open-ended. So we celebrate it in the sense that, we obviously announce it because we want the example to serve some purpose within the industry. I don't really think it is meant to do much more than that, to be honest with you. And I think at the same time, it internally is one where, to your point, you can actually, the same way I told you about the flight schedule, right? Which is, here's what's happening on our flight schedule in a given day. It's not just bringing celebrities from, point A to point B in fancy places. It's really about, the productivity, the pragmatism, or the emergency level that goes into this, or the sensitivity or the confidentiality. Same thing here. When, everybody's been talking about this, to actually slow down and say, okay, here's, the numbers, here's what we've impacted. And by the way, here's what it's funding. Right? That makes it real. And I think you're right. And I think being able to celebrate that is an important step. And, we didn't do that last year because we were new to it. We went through and just needed to see what it would do. We knew what we were funding, and we certainly educated our team to some extent. But I think this year it'll be far more enriched in the way we talk about it. And then, to the point that I told you too about how we're going to now have this as a trackable component for our clients, it's just going to make it that much more visible and that much more woven in the fabric of what we do.
Well, and you also got on the show because of that. So there's that.
There's that too. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's great. That's a very good point.
That's
And
true.
and a very nice a nice opportunity for sure.
I mean, you're right. We can't predict the future, but my sense is, and just from talking from different, like at different sectors, and I've been in Washington D.C. for so long, talking to different, have my clientele base has forever been trade associations. This is going to be transformative in ways we can't really predict, but it is going to change things. And
Yep.
it's already happening. Some groups are further along than others with their sense of urgency associated. So I'd certainly commend the effort to get going with what you guys are doing. One other random question I came across, just happened to see, what are EVTOLs? What are the electric vertical takeoff?
eVTOLs. Yeah,
eVTOLs.
so I'll help you there, right? We'll start with that. eVTOL,
Yeah.
right?
What's that, and why is there an order for how many?
All right, so there's two things that I think are important in our
Okay.
world. One is EBITDA, right? So the
Okay.
bottom line, but one is eVTOLs. eVTOLs are electronic vertical takeoff and landing vehicles. So
Okay.
they are the Jetsonian vehicles that you're seeing pop up in news feeds and everywhere else now. They actually became very prevalent in nature over the last 5 years because a lot of money, private capital, has gone into funding. It's the future of flight. So I'll tell you, OneSky, which is, and for 1 second, OneSky is a company that represents different entry points into flying. FlexJet, the biggest company in OneSky, is a fractional ownership and has 175 aircraft, for instance. Then there's the Jet Card, which is Sentient, which uses third-party operators and partners, and is the largest jet card company in the world. And then there's FX Air, which is a on-demand charter company. Those three companies are all going to be impacted in some way by eVTOLs. We just, like you said, we can't predict the future, but people are certainly trying to, bring it forward as quickly as they can. So OneSky has actually invested in 200 eVTOLs.
Okay. Owning them. Okay.
Yeah. So there's one other facet of OneSky that's really interesting is we got into what they call vertical lift, which, the common way of saying it is helicopters, right? So we bought a company in New York City, which was the largest twin engine VIP helicopter company in the United States, or in the Northeast. And then we bought one in London concurrently. And we, have brought these two companies together, and we have integrated helicopters into private flying as part of our product set. But ultimately, we've also purchased these 200 eVTOLs, 100 theoretically for the United States, and 100 in New York City and the surrounding area, and 100 for London. And the reason being is to solve sort of the short distance aviation conundrum, right? Mm-hmm. Make it so that it's more capital efficient, make it that it's quiet so there's noise abatement, and make it so that it's environmental friendly. Ultimately, if you want to get to kind of carbon zero, we'll have to remove fossil fuel potentially, right? I assume that's probably, I'm not a scientist, and, nor do I pretend to be one, but electric can do that potentially in many respects, right? And that's where a lot of folks are invested. That's an eVTOL, right? So it's maybe a 2 to 4 passenger piloted
up
or
and down across the city kind of thing.
You got it. It's like, the easiest way to say it is could land on a parking garage, could even potentially land near your house, and you get to go on a quick mission, or some of them can go, are potentially being designed to go for further distances, but most of it's meant for short distances in awkward places, or places where mass transit succeeds today but is overcrowded, or what have you. So eVTOLs are now on the horizon. They are probably something that gets certified within the next 4 to 5 years by the FAA. And, we hope they're in kind of the consumer world in the next 5 to 10 years. And we've made a bet on it. And, again, kind of that
sounds
thought
like a big bet.
Being part of innovation and being part of it. We believe in it. You got to lay the groundwork. And our chairman is very forward thinking in that regard. And so, it's important, but that's what an eVTOL is. And there are some known names out there because they've raised so much and they've gotten a lot of television visibility and the like. But in the end, we're partnered with a company called Eve. It was spun out of Embraer, the jet manufacturing company. And we're delighted to be partnered with them. They're actually testing something right now in Chicago. There'll be some news on it, I think, this week. But they're running a lot of tests for now to just get people used to conceptually what an eVTOL route would be like. And then eventually this will likely become commonplace. I mean, there's enough capital, there's enough desire, and then there's enough, I would say, governmental investment in these areas, whether it's the FAA or the CAA in London, that, it'll happen. I think the question will be, how do you think about traffic management for these things in the air, right? So urban air traffic management is going to be a very real thing, and that's going to require technology, that's going to require policy, et cetera.
I wonder, these eVTOLs, are they driver, like, do you have to have a pilot in it, or are they sort of getting to a point of more automation? They have like their route, they go up, they go down.
That's a great question. I think some will have pilots at first and then eventually switch to autonomous. Some might come out as autonomous. The interesting thing to think about is you actually have a lot more decision points in an automobile, given the context of what an automobile does and the environment that it does it in versus something in the air. So you probably have a more predefined way of doing autonomy in something like an eVTOL.
In the air.
Right. It's just up to whether the consumer accepts it and by what point they accept it. That'll happen as well, though. And it feels very Jetsonian to talk about, but
that sounds, it sounds incredible. It sounds probably even like maybe even between hospitals, right? Like specialist hospitals, right? I'm in Washington, D.C. If something happens to your hand, you kind of want to go to Johns Hopkins. They have specialists.
And you can get there. Absolutely.
It would be fantastic for these things to exist that can just drop you right in there at Johns Hopkins. Yeah, right now, it's by helicopter, pretty big machine, right, to do that.
And not as many in many places could be being used elsewhere. The other thing is, a lot of things tend to drive adoption in unexpected ways. My guess is that eVTOLs will get, especially the autonomous ones, will probably see adoption for things like bringing things out to oil rigs or bringing medicine to far-flung places and deliveries, right? The stuff Amazon maybe is experimenting with, or heavy industrial stuff. Or it could be in another, not the United States. It could end up being India, for instance, that uses
traffic gridlock exists.
Absolutely, right? You think about it, you got it. And so there's a lot of ways to think about the unexpected or the byproducts that might come out of this, but that might actually drive the adoption, because that may set kind of the baseline of, okay, how do these fly? All the measurements associated with it, how safe are they, et cetera. And so I think that we're on the path to finding that now. Those are when you're going to see those form factors in the air sooner, and then ultimately they'll get to the consumer once the regulatory bodies feel good.
Right. Yeah. Just an anecdotal story. I got to ride with the Red Cross in Mexico City. I used to be a former firefighter, and I had a volunteer firefighter. I had some fun there, but I remember having a conversation with those guys and asking them about their air capability. They had one helicopter for the entire city at the time. This was like 10, 15 years ago. And it would only fly emergencies for children. So if they just didn't have the capacity, it was already too busy as it was. So this helicopter just was designated for injured children to get them quickly to a hospital for a huge metropolis, right? So hopefully that's improved, but this could also be the next direction for stuff like that, right?
Very well could, well could, for sure.
Andrew, that was an hour. Thank you. I know you're a busy guy and there's a lot going on. So I can't thank you enough for giving us an insight into this space and what you guys have been doing with sustainability. I keep asking this with every guest. I want to have you back. I'd like to see what it's like a year from now and what have been, the results for some of this effort for you guys. So
that'd be great. No, I really appreciate this and appreciated the time. Wonderful conversation, and that hour flew by.
Yeah, I somebody actually wants to look up more about the business, sentient.com, right? SENTIENT.com.
Correct. You got it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. Take care. Appreciate it. If you like the show, please help me out on the YouTube channel. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Visit throughthenoise.us for more episodes and subscribe to our newsletter. This show is produced by Through the Noise Consulting, uniting external communications and internal IT functions to ensure data and privacy are protected while creating innovative communications platforms. Want to start your own podcast? We can help. Visit getthroughthenoise.com to learn more.